Okay, well, we have some interesting things in our text tonight. I got a couple of maps that I'll show you. And can you believe that in, well, let's see, how do I want to phrase this? There will be times when you'll be studying through a particular text and we get familiar with some of the names and the faces, some of the personalities in the text. And it's always kind of sad when you see one of them pass from the scene, right? Ones that are kind of endearing and whatnot. In this case, they're kind of on again, off again. In this chapter, the first chapter that we're in, we're going to say goodbye to both Aaron and Miriam. And, Miriam has just said very uneventful, but the whole thing with Aaron is like, oh my gosh, that's one of the saddest things I've ever heard in my life, the way that it's going to be. And it's, again, because they misrepresented God. And we'll get into all of that here tonight. And then have you ever had somebody that would say to you, well, I think God contradicts himself because the Bible says you will not kill, and yet he sends them out to kill. You ever had that one thrown at you? And so how do you answer it? So it's, fortunately, it's, looking at the original language. That's how you know. And, of course, context is everything. But you're going to see that there are a number of places where the people go to war. And it wasn't really of their choosing. In fact, they just want to get home. And they're saying straight up, we just want to be able to pass through your land. We won't take anything. We won't hassle anybody. It's the direct route to get home. And boy, oh boy, do they take, as best we can tell, they have to take quite the route to do so. Now here's the problem. We're talking about matters of thousands of years ago. So, 3,500 plus, or somewhere thereabouts, 100 years ago. So knowing exactly where each of these places is pretty tough to do. So we've got a fairly decent understanding, but to say that you know the exact route, there's just no way. But there are some really fascinating things in this section of Numbers. We won't be able to get to the whole thing with Balaam. That's going to be, and Balak and all that stuff. That's going to be not next Sunday, because next Sunday is communion, but the following Sunday is when we'll get into that. But really, really interesting. Numbers is a very, very intriguing book because there are so many very recognizable stories in this, that we're familiar with, that you might not even think that they're in Numbers, but we've already covered a lot of them. And so we will cover a couple more tonight. So let's turn to chapter 20 is where we are. And when we get to the places, I'll pull up the first of the maps in just a moment here. Let's have a word of prayer. Let's take a look here. Father, we thank you as you gather us here tonight that we are able to be taught of your Holy Spirit. And as we study a lot of the history of the children of Israel, we are able at the same time to recognize why this history is there and why is it so important. And there is even much that we are able to see of things that you were telling and application matters. And so we pray for the attentiveness of our hearts and minds and that you would give us that understanding that we desire as we come before you and seek knowledge. We thank you and we give you all praise in Jesus' name. Amen? Now, it's very matter of fact, but you read in chapter 20, the very first verse, it says, then the children of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin. You know what, let's do this. Can I get 4-4 up, please? Okay. So, wilderness of Zin, you can probably see this, and for a change, I used my noodle and brought a pointer. So you can see wilderness of Zin is here, okay? Now, this is one that you'll notice, the route that they put out here is pretty good, I think, especially when you get up into the higher parts. Here's what I mean. When you get up around here, we get a pretty good idea of where they were going, and that's going to be in the next chapter. But at the beginning, we know that they're at Kadesh, okay? So they're in this area here, and this seems to be the area where they go and they want to pass through. It's a little bit hard to see possibly, but do you see this blue line here? Okay. That would be what's known as the King's Highway. And so it runs kind of parallel to what comes out of the Dead Sea. Above it would be the Jordan River that that ends into the Dead Sea, and then water comes all the way out to Elat, which is right down here. And that's the tip of the Red Sea, kind of where Israel, when you see it on a map and it comes to a point, that's Elat. And so that's where finally the water will find its way. And so anyway, what it looks like, and it kind of gives the impression that when he gets here, they're not seemingly going through Edom, because it says, you'll notice there's a place that says by way of the Red Sea. Though they're all the way up here, they're going to go here and then come inland this way. So they're going to be on the other side of the Red Sea. They'll be coming, or of the Dead Sea rather, they're going to be coming in through Jordan. So this is modern day Jordan here, and that seems to be the route best we can tell. And what they would be doing is trying to stay along the routes that people would travel, because you're generally going to find water and provision and everything else. But think about how big of a group this is. There's a couple million people trekking through the desert. So, wow. Now we're going to find another thing that I just cannot for the life of me understand why they continually do this. You're going to find at least on two occasions just tonight that you're going to hear the same people say again, wouldn't it have been better if God didn't bring us out here just to kill us? It's like, really? You're going to do that one again? You know how poorly that ends up for you. And you're also forgetting that you came out of bondage. You were slaves in Egypt, and here you are griping. Well, so it says that they came out of the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried. So she dies in this area of what we call Kadesh. So there are a few different Kadesh, this, that, and the others. So you're basically, that would be where Mount Hor is, but there are other potential places that you might see mentioned as being Mount Hor, which would be more in this area here. So even with that, it's hard for people to even agree on where Aaron actually dies, but they both die in this same general time, okay? So it says, now here we get verse 2. Now there was no water for the congregation, and so they gathered together against Moses and against Aaron. The people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. Now, there are a few questions of when was that? Was that the whole thing with Korah? Was that why didn't you just wipe us out when you wiped them out? Well, those guys were in sin. You guys weren't at the time, but you're getting there, because it's gonna happen. So, verse 4, why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into the wilderness, and we and our animals should die here? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink. Now, let's remember, by the time that they get to this place, they're not there because of God. They're there because of them. Remember when they went and spied out the land? The only reason these people are out walking around in the wilderness is because of their own sin. God says, I got to wait until you guys all die off so I can bring your kids in, you bunch of gripers. So they've got to kind of play out their lives because they've already brought judgment on themselves. So he's basically having to wait for that to take place. Now, so Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and they fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. This is we've seen this a number of times, right? This same thing repeats. Now, here's what's different this time. It's the reaction of Moses. What they've done is right. It's everything by pattern the way that they're supposed to do. A problem presents itself, even though the way that it's said by the people is an accusation, yet they humbly come before the Lord and say, Lord, what do we do about this? The Lord's presence comes at the tabernacle of meeting. Everything is just like it's supposed to be, until then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying in verse 7, now at verse 8, take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, gather the congregation together, speak to the rock. Now we're going to go look at the last time something like this happened, but he says to it in this case, speak to the rock, and before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you will bring water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and to their animals. Okay, does anybody think, gosh, it sounds familiar? Does it sound familiar? Yeah, because it's happened once before. Now, we're going to go there in just a moment, but here's what's interesting. There are people who would say that they try to make this spiritualized, probably over the top a little bit. And they will make this about, Jesus being the rock and the water and all that stuff. Okay, you can make some of that, but let's not go too far with it. What we want to be able to take a look at and just say, well, it was supposed to be miraculous because has anybody seen water out of a rock without some other source? Like water's already coming to it and it splits through a rock. Water does not come from rocks. Are we agreed? So whether it's going to be something that he strikes it like he was supposed to do the first time, Exodus 17, or in this case speak to it, there are a couple of important things here. He doesn't take it upon himself. And he doesn't, Moses, and he also doesn't just say, well, this is what we did before. Instead, he consults with the Lord, and the Lord has him do something totally different. That's an important thing, because we don't want to get stuck in just saying, same place, same thing, same situation, God's just going to do the same thing, and not consult with him. So he has him do something totally different. Let's turn to Exodus 17, and we'll look at those two instances. Okay. And since we have time, let's just read the whole of it. It's the first 7 verses. Now, in verse 1 of chapter 17 of Exodus, it says, Then all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sin. Sin is actually the way it's said. According to the commandment of the Lord, and they camped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people contended with Moses, saying, Give us water that we may drink. And so Moses said to them, Why do you contend with me? Why do you tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, What? What did they say? Why is it that you have brought us up out of Egypt, us and our children, that our livestock and all the thirst? And so Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, What shall I do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me. How would you like to be the one tasked with bringing the children of Israel up out of Egypt? Okay, so the Lord said to Moses, Go on before the people. Take you with you some elders of Israel. Also take in your hand the rod with which you struck the river and go. Behold, I will stand before you on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and so he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, which means tempted and contention. Okay? And why is that? Because of the contention of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not? So when you see Massah and Meribah, that basically means testing. That's you're provoking God in this case. And then you've caused a contention among the people and among the leadership. So, same situation. They're there, the people start griping. Moses wants to know what to do. God says, go to the rock there at Horeb and strike it. Doesn't tell him twice, doesn't say speak to it. Strike the rock once, water will come out. Okay. Same situation, different location, but everything looks exactly the same. So God tells him what he is supposed to do. Go and speak to the rock in this case. And so Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he had commanded him, and Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, Hear now, you rebels. God did not tell him to say that. So it's now Moses that is engaging in and along in the contention with the people. That is the first problem. Now, look at what else he does. So he says, Hear now, you rebels, must we... Oops. Do you hear the record scratching? Scratch. You shouldn't have said that. Now it's making this won't happen without me. Strike 2. Must we bring water for you out of the rock? And then Moses lifted up his hand and he struck the rock twice. He struck it once the first time in Exodus 17 because he was told to. In this case, he was told only speak to it. Now he strikes it out of his anger twice. He did so with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. So God still took care of the needs of the people, but boy, oh boy, this was going to be an incredible turning point for these guys. And it's not going to take long for one of them. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Because you did not believe me. Notice what he says. He puts them in the category of unbelief because they were not faithful to follow exactly what he had said. So Moses makes it personal, gets mad, takes stuff onto himself, and now here God has to say, both of you. Both of you. So he says, because you did not believe me and hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel. You yelled at them, got mad, and called them rebels. I didn't tell you to say any of that. So they took way too much on themselves. Therefore, you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. This is the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel contended with the Lord, and he was hallowed among them. Now, there again, that word contention. Notice that this is the exact same result of the people that you saw in Exodus 17. You're seeing it now here again in Numbers chapter 20. Same problem. Okay, the people griped, did God bring us here to kill us? And they made it a contention. They did it again. This time the problem was also that Aaron and Moses had come into it and made it contentious there as well. They had joined in, and now God was going to judge them in a much different way. Now, in verse 14, now Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. So notice what you have here is to go over this way. Now what they want to do, they want to get up to the promised land. Now they're not going to come up through this way because they've already kind of encountered that problem, and God said we're not going to go that way. They goes over this way, and Moses does everything that he's supposed to. They're just not getting any kind of cooperation. You're going to see that that is consistent. The first group that they are going to encounter, the Edomites, are a different group entirely, at least as far as the way that they are discussing these things. And you'll notice the way that they are going to communicate with them. Look at how he says it. So he sends them to the king of Edom, and he says, thus says your brother Israel. Interesting way of doing it. You know all of the hardships that have befallen us. Now, even that way of saying your brother Israel, what does that mean? These are the children of Israel. What was Israel's name before he was Israel? Jacob. Who was Jacob's brother? Esau. Where did Esau wind up? That's his area. That's why they're coming to them, hey, we are the sons of Jacob, you are the sons of Esau. We are your brothers. You know what has happened to us. So, in that case, verse 15, how our fathers went to Egypt and dwelt in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians afflicted us and our fathers. When we cried out to the Lord, he heard our voice and sent an angel and brought us up out of Egypt. And now here we are at Kadesh, a city on the edge of your border. Now please let us pass through your country, and we will not pass through any fields or vineyards. We will not drink water from your wells. We will go along the king's highway, that's in the blue there, and we will not turn aside from the right hand or from the left until we have passed through your whole territory. It's a reasonable thing that they ask. Now, there is going to be a whole series of these confrontations through a variety of people and kings and peoples and all the rest. You're going to find that there are a lot of skirmishes that happen. That was not what they were ready for, but think about this. When you remember the numbering of the people, there were men that were of fighting age in the hundreds of thousands with Israel. It's a pretty formidable bunch of people. So the one thing you can say, that their lives were horrible in Egypt, but their numbers grew in enormous senses. So there are a couple million people probably on the road, hundreds of thousands who are able to take up arms. That's formidable. Well, here they are, and they're making their way through all of these places. Now, verse 17, please let us pass through your country. And then verse 18, then Edom said to him, you shall not pass through my land, lest I come out against you with the sword. And so the children of Israel said to him, we will go by the highway, and if I or my livestock drink any of your water, then I will pay for it. Let me only pass through on foot, nothing more. So it's gone back from, can we? No, you can't. Would you just let us do this? I'm giving you my word. We won't use any of your resource. Well, so he said, you will not pass through. So Edom came out against them with many men and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through their territory. So Israel was turned away from him. Now there wasn't the big battle here, but those are all going to be taking place. But that was ultimately, there's kind of a backing from it. Now, Now the children of Israel, the whole congregation, journeyed from Kadesh, came to Mount Hor, and this is where we say goodbye to Aaron. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in Mount Hor and the border at the land of Edom, saying, now if it is as this says, which I kind of think that's a little bit of a, I don't think that really works, that would be where the mount is. I think it's more over here, and you find that some think that it's over in this area here. But again, this is just one of those places that we don't know for sure, so there's no sense in speculating. What we know is a very monumental event happened here, and it is the death of Aaron. So at verse 24 it says, Aaron shall be gathered to his people. Now if you just read that, we know what that means, that he's going to die. So you think to yourself, if you didn't read any more, what happens? Is it just kind of an old age thing? Is there a war that happens? But something happens to Aaron and he dies at this mountain. And this is after they have had the spies go out. So it's just kind of hard to tell where exactly this takes place. But we know that it's very close to the border of Edom. Now, here's what it says after that. Aaron will be gathered to his fathers, for he shall not enter the land which I have given to the children of Israel, because you rebelled against my word at the water of Meribah. So he actually points out one particular instance where Aaron will not be able to continue on because of that. Now, all that we get, think about it, all that we really get is what Moses had done of striking the rock, but Aaron is held responsible too. Was there more to their discussion that we don't know? Was there more that Aaron had done? Did he help whip up Moses? Who knows? We don't have that. We can't speculate. We do know this. It was important enough that God said, I'm not going to look the other way on this. Now Aaron is going to be, he's done. So listen to this. Can you imagine this walk? Look at this. Take Aaron and Eleazar, that's his son, and bring them to Mount Hor. Strip Aaron of his garments and put them on Eleazar his son, for Aaron shall be gathered to his people and die there. Oh my gosh. Imagine hearing this. Is anybody else really troubled by this? I mean, I'm just kind of creeped out by this whole thing. But this is, if anybody wants to know the seriousness of these things, when you misrepresent God, goodness gracious, this is a serious thing. Look at this, verse 26. It gets worse. Strip Aaron of his garments, put them on Eleazar his son, for Aaron shall be gathered to his people and die. So Moses did just as the Lord commanded, and they went up to Mount Hor in the sight of the congregation. Moses stripped Aaron of his garments, put them on Eleazar his son, and Aaron died there on top of the mountain. Then Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. Wow. I don't know about you, but that's just stunning. That's just, wow. That's heavy stuff. Verse 29. Now when all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, all of the house of Israel mourned for Aaron 30 days. Isn't this a guy that they just wanted to string up because we couldn't get water? Fickle. So for a month, they go through what is a normal mourning period. Now, here are a couple of things that I really want to make sure that we spend a little bit of time talking about because they're important. Here now, as they begin to go, now if this is accurate, and it more than likely is because you're going to hear by way of the Dead Sea in one case, if they're not able to go through Edom, and you can't go through this, you can kind of make out these mountain ranges. We've gone by those. You don't want to take people over the top. So if they go back, kind of back down to the Dead Sea, there is a passage. It's right here, right outside of Eilat. And when we went to, one year that we took the Israel trip, we went to Petra. And we went through this pass. And that was the best route to get to where we were going, which Petra is on this side of the mountain ranges. And I'm telling you what, it was a huge incline. And it's pretty inhospitable, but it was the best way. That may very well be why they went so far south, because they couldn't use any of the passes up in Edom. They were already told, no, you can't come through our land. So they're going all the way back down and then all the way back up. Meanwhile, Aaron's gone. Now Eleazar's taking on that position of being high priest. So if this is the way, then what they've done is they've gone down, and now they're going to go much further to the east and bypass all of that land. In this case, there are going to be a number of other kings that are going to want to take their shot at Israel. So I asked that question a little bit earlier. What do we do about this matter of, well, Exodus chapter 20 tells us you will not kill, right? Now, there's a situation with the language. Let's go to, actually, let me just give you some references. When you get to thou shalt not kill, or you will not kill, from Exodus chapter 20, verse 13, the word is rashach. That would be the word for kill in the Hebrew is you shall not kill. What about if you were to take a look at the book of Genesis, chapter 4, 14? That's the whole Cain and Abel thing, and that is harak. That would be the Hebrew word for kill. That's much more common. It's used 167 times. We would look at Cain and Abel. That is a murder. Are we agreed on that? But it is not the word that God uses when he says that you will not kill. You will find one place where both are used in one verse. And it is found in the book of Psalms. Let's turn there. It's Psalm 94. Okay. In Psalm 94 at verse 6, you see the word, they slay the widow and the stranger? That is harak. You shall not kill, from Exodus chapter 20. Follow me so far? It is still a killing. You will not do that kind of killing. What about another word that's used? You see again at the end of that verse, and murder the fatherless. That murder there is rashah. So you have two different words that can both be used, and notice that the whole context of this is David saying vengeance on the people who do wickedly, and part of what they do is that they kill indiscriminately, unjustly. It's not right that you do what you do. So you will find that there are times when God would tell his people to go and kill and use the same kind of word that you would see like in Exodus. But there's a difference between whether or not it is a justified versus whether it's a murder. And the context is going to tell you exactly what you're supposed to be doing and how you're supposed to read that. Now, there's a word entirely different from even those, like when you get into Leviticus and all of the slaying of the animals. It says that the animal, you will kill the animal at the doorway of the tabernacle or wherever it may be. It's, again, another entirely different Hebrew word. So the complexity of the language is entirely different than English. So when we translate things into English, here's just the easiest answer to this. When you have the people that will object to that, we would go ahead and say, even in English, if we believe in self-defense and if somebody is killed at our hands in self-defense, is that different than if we sought them out and premeditatively, not knowing them, just killed them? Does not God view those things entirely different? Absolutely. One's justified and justifiable, one is right and one is just, the other one is just simple murder. Though we would use the word kill. Well, it's very much the same in Hebrew, but they have different words for different applications. So it becomes a matter of the language. But it's easiest for us to be able to explain which one is which based on circumstance. Was Cain killing of Abel righteous? Of course not. So in these cases, you have both the one that God uses in Exodus and the one that is really meant and intended to be murdered also in the exact same verse. So clearly it must be a matter of context, because God would not contradict himself by sending his people to war and violating his own word. It would never happen. So we want to be really careful that we are able to say, let's make sure that we are understanding that the Bible was not written in English, but even through English we can understand there is a difference in this versus justified and not justified. So with that in mind, we get to chapter 21. So the king of Arad. Now, Arad, let's see if we've got this here. Some of these places, again, we just don't know for sure where they are. But we know that they're starting to come down. Well, here is Arad here. Now, they're best here that we know, but after this incident that we're going to read about, they start to make their way down. But whoever this guy is up here, something happens when they must be in this area. It's hard to really determine it. Is that actually where he was? But we know that he's down towards the south. So read that. Verse 1 of chapter 21. The king of Arad, the Canaanite who dwelt in the south, heard that Israel was coming on the road to Atharim, and then he fought against Israel and took some of the prisoners. So Israel made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed deliver this people into my hand, then I will utterly destroy their cities. And the Lord listened to the voice of Israel and delivered up the Canaanites. So do you understand the operation that goes on here? If God was not going to contradict himself, or as people would like to say, he would have prevented them from doing this. They were attacked in an unprovoked manner, and then it's like, what do we do? They've taken some of our people. Should we then go to them, get them back, but then go to war with them? There's hostility. So here's the issue. If there are hostilities, and if we're just being honest about this, let's just put ourselves in that place, and you know that there's going to be war. Is it better that they perish or that you? Okay? So the Lord listened to the voice of Israel, delivered up the Canaanites, and they utterly destroyed them and their cities. So the name of that place was called Hormah. And so then they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea. Now, here's what's funny about it. Wherever you place Mount Hor, where Aaron died, whether it's here or somewhere in this area, to say you do it by the way of the Dead Sea, or the Red Sea rather, that's not the way of anything. Unless you're just not going to want to go to war with your, quote, brothers and go through their land when they said, don't do it or we're coming against you. For whatever reason, God prevented that from taking place, though he did not keep them from engaging all the other guys. Kind of an interesting thing. So it looks like they will make their way kind of in the general sense that way. What they wanted to do was to come up the King's Highway. But that takes them right through Edom. Instead, they're going to go on the eastern way of that and come in through and then get to what is the area of what's modern-day Amman, Jordan. Okay? So, in verse 5, this is, again, one of those really fascinating sections of the Scripture because of a really bizarre event that takes place. Now, this is, again, one of those places, you know my weird sense of humor about this kind of thing. If there is a video, room in heaven, this is one of the episodes that I want to watch. Because I want to see the look on Moses' face when God gives him the direction. Here's what you're supposed to do. Listen to this. So the people spoke against God and against Moses. They never learn. They said, why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread. Oh boy. Now they've added that part in. Worthless? Seriously? You're drawing breath because of it. Bunch of gripey people. And again, remember, they're wandering in the wilderness because of them, not because of God's inability to bring them in. They are the ones who have failed, and they keep adding offense to this. Well, so here is their matter. Our soul loathes this worthless bread. Remember, these are the same people that says, oh, do you remember the meat pots? The garlics and the leeks and the onions that we used to have in Egypt? Yeah, when you were making brick without straw? And they could kill you just for looking at them the wrong way? Yeah, that was a great gig, wasn't it? All right. So what happens? But the Lord sends fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people died. So once again, this never-ending cycle. The people gripe. God is done listening to it, and there's judgment that comes, even though he continues to sustain them. But their numbers are starting to get thinned out in some small way because of all of this stuff going on. Now, what would be the remedy? All right. Therefore, the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned. Can you imagine being Moses? Really? Do tell. What did you do this time? Well, of course, they know. We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray the Lord that he take away the serpents from us. And so Moses prayed for the people. Now, intercessing at this point is really pretty amazing. Of course, he doesn't take the time to say, are you guys serious? Are you just saying this because you got busted? Are you sorry because you got caught? All those kind of things that we would say if it was our kids. Instead, he intercedes for them yet again. Now, here's God's reply. The Lord spoke to Moses, Make a fiery serpent. Set it on a pole, and it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks upon it, shall live. Now, imagine being the person hearing that directive. You're going to say, wait a minute, let me make sure I got this straight. A brazen serpent means we have to fashion one. Got to make it. Now, bronze, of course, speaks of judgment. There's a lot of symbolism going on here. But really? Uncle Hank just died of one of these snakes, and now you're telling me if one of those guys bites me, all I got to do is take a look at the snake on the pole and it's all good? Yeah, that's exactly it. That makes no sense. Exactly. It's not supposed to. Because it's not anything that anyone would then be able to take any kind of credit for. It's not a medicinal thing. It's nothing else other than God has asked you to do something that makes no sense to the mind, and yet it'll be effective without question. So, verse 9, so Moses made a bronze serpent, put it on a pole, and so it was, if a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. Now the narrative is going to move on from that, like no big deal. Me, I just want to go, wait a minute. There's got to be more to this. Why is this here for us? There's a very easy answer for that, needless to say, because we have it in the Gospel of John in two different places. The first one is in chapter 3 when Jesus talks to Nicodemus. Let's turn there. Because if we did not have that information in Numbers, then what he says to Nicodemus would make no sense to us whatsoever, right? We all know what John 3:15 and 3:16 says. Let's read those first. Verse 15 of John 3 says that whoever believes on him will not perish but have eternal life. Statement of fact. So in that statement of fact, in verse 16 rather, we are given the reason why. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and then it's a repeat of verse 15, right? Most people, if you were to ask them, can you recite John 3:16 for me, they'll be able to do it. If you say, can you tell me what John 3:14 says, they have no clue. Read John 3:14. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. That's why we have Numbers chapter 21. Yeah, 21. That's why it's there, in my estimation. I can't prove it, but it would make no sense for Jesus to make reference to something so important that really doesn't make any sense, even for the person that would have been watching it at the time. Why is Jesus on a cross? We look back in hindsight, we totally understand. If they knew their Bible, they would also understand a little bit of that because, gosh, without that, Psalm 22 doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because it's describing crucifixion before crucifixion was a form of capital punishment. The Romans weren't around at that time when that was written by David. So, very, very intriguing. Now, Jesus also, because that is something said very privately to Nicodemus, right? They're the only two guys in the room. Jesus will also say something else. Chapter 12 of John. Let's turn there. And let's look at verse 30. Let's see. Let's start at verse 27. Now my soul is troubled, Jesus said, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven saying, I have both glorified it and will glorify it again. Therefore the people who stood by and heard of it said that it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken. And then Jesus said, let me settle this for you guys. This voice did not come because of me, but for your sake. Now the judgment of this world, and now is the judgment of this world, and now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And if I am lifted up, that word lifted up there in chapter 12 is the exact same phrase in the Greek as lifted up in John chapter 3. Same phrase. So as Jesus refers back to Numbers 21 and said, as Moses lifted up, that lifted up in the Greek is exactly what Jesus says here. If I am lifted up, I will draw all men to myself, all manner of men to myself. What does it mean by all? Think, as Paul would say, anybody that has called upon him. So Jew, Gentile, rich, poor, free, slave, man, woman, all of them, all manner. Clearly not all will be saved, or else there's no reason for the lake of fire. Right? Okay. So back to Numbers. That whole fiery serpent thing. What is that all about? If you didn't already know before, you certainly do now. Kind of cool, huh? So, best way for you to, quote, interpret the Bible is let it do it for you. Verse 10. Now the children of Israel moved on and they camped at Oboth. Now, these are all given to us. At the original writing of this probably would have made a lot more sense because they were much more familiar with the areas at the time. And it would give some kind of an idea of their trek and how they would go. When we get further north in this, then it starts to make a bit more sense because we are somewhat familiar with where those places are archaeologically. So verse 12, it says, now from there they moved and they camped in the valley of Zered. When you look up there, you can see the brook Zered. Right up over here. So what that means is the valley somewhere in that area. Notice that they're still a little bit in the problem area where Edom is, but they're also coming up to Moab, and you're going to notice that they're about to transition from one kingdom to another, and they're going to continue to encounter resistance. Verse 14, from there they moved and they camped on the other side of Arnon, which is in the wilderness that extends from the border of the Amorites, for the Arnon is the border of Moab. So look where you have the two places there of the borders that are mentioned, right? So all you got to do is read it and you can know kind of their territories. There's no clear line, but it's not much in the way of overlap. There's one kingdom that leads to another. So, and from there they moved and they camped on the other side of Arnon, verse 13, which is in the wilderness that extends from the border of the Amorites, for Arnon is the border of Moab, between Moab and the Amorites. And therefore, it is said in the book of the wars of the Lord. Now, these are books that we're not, we can't put our finger on it. Waheb in Sufan, the brooks of Arnon, and the slope of the brooks that reach to the dwelling of Ar, and lies at the border of Moab. And so this is just the chronicling, if you will, of this route for what we know of it. Verse 16. Now from there they went to Beer, which is the well where the Lord said to Moses, gather the people together and I will give them water. And so then Israel sang this song, Spring Up, O Well. All of you sing to it. And the well, the leaders sank, dug by the nation's nobles, by the lawgiver with their staves. And from the wilderness, they went to Mattanah. And from Mattanah, they went to Nahalel, something like that. Nahalil. And from Nahalil, they went to Bemoth. And from Bemoth, in the valley that is the country of Moab, to the top of Pisgah, which looks down from the wasteland. Now, Pisgah, you'll notice, where is it? It's up, I know I'm looking at it. Okay, there's our possible. There's a question mark next to it. But now you get an idea. They've moved past, but now they're into not so friendly territory. Not as though Edom was, but they weren't going to engage with those guys. Now they're going to have a whole series of things that will happen here. So in verse 21, then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, the king of the Amorites, and here's what he says. Now notice again, you will have people sometimes that love to say, oh, that God of the Bible, he's such into war and killing and blood and battle and all the rest of that. They are going to people who are probably not all that excited to see them, and yet rather than just going in and destroying people, they try to do this peacefully. And here's what you'll see. Verse 22, let me pass through your land. We will not turn aside into your fields or your vineyards. We will not drink water from your wells. We will go by the king's highway until we have passed through your territory. That's exactly what they said to Edom. They're brothers. Exactly. Same exact thing. But Sihon would not allow Israel to pass through his territory, but Sihon gathered up all of his people together, went out against Israel in the wilderness, and came to Jahaz, and they fought against Israel. Then Israel defeated him with the edge of the sword, took possessions of the land of Arnon to Jabbok as far as the people of Ammon, for the border of the people of Ammon was fortified. Now, that helps you to realize just how old Ammon is, or Ammon. Ammon is that would be the capital, but that's the kingdom of Ammon, which is above the Moabites. So you see it all there? Okay. So still going towards the north, and they're going to get to the place where they're ready to go in. Now, they're going to end up staying here for a little bit of time because there's a lot of, they're going to settle in because they're taking these lands. But this is not the promised land. Though you will find that when they finally settle the land, two of the tribes come into this area that are, it's to the east of the River Jordan. And we'll get to that when we get to those books. But for now, they're just up in that area. Now, again, notice here, by this time, they are at the tip of the northern tip of the Red Sea. Now, this is kind of the area where you would go from Israel into Jordan, because the Jordan River is the border between modern-day Israel and Jordan. And really, you would ask, well, if that's the case, where's the border going through the Dead Sea? Kind of right in the middle of it. And is there any marking? Nope. But it's a bad idea if you try to take a boat across. People don't put boats in the Dead Sea anyway. It's just not a good idea. They will float, for sure. People float in the Dead Sea. You can't sink yourself. It's a pretty weird sensation. But anyway, you don't want to know any of that. Okay. So verse 24 rather. So Israel defeated him with the edge of the sword, took possessions of the land of Arnon and Jabbok, to the Jabbok rather, as far as the people of Ammon. Now, verse 25 says, So Israel took all the cities, and Israel dwelt in the cities of the Amorites, in Heshbon and in the villages. For Heshbon was the city that Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab, and had taken this land as far as Arnon. So this had already been a place that had been conquered by one king over another. Now Israel comes in, just wanted to pass through the land. They didn't allow it. So God gives them victory. Notice he says, it tells us that God delivered them. So here again, God's fighting the battles. They had impressive numbers, but God said, you've tried to do this peaceably. You're on your way to the land that I promised you. I'll give you favor in this. Now, did they deserve favor? Not hardly. I mean, think about it. How many times have they provoked him? But see, remember, the promise was to Abraham and to your descendants. So God is going to make good on that promise. Therefore, those who speak in Proverbs. Now, different Proverbs. It's not the one that you're thinking, because obviously this was well before Solomon, so it's not that book of Proverbs. Come to Heshbon, let it be built. Let the city of Sihon be repaired. For fire went out from Heshbon, a flame from the city of Sihon. It consumed Ar of Moab, the lords of the heights of the Arnon. Woe to you, Moab! You have perished, O people of Shamash. He has given his sons as fugitives and his daughters into captivity to Sihon, king of the Amorites. But we have shot at them. Heshbon has perished as far as Dibon, and then we laid waste as far as Nophah, which reaches to Medeba. Now, that's the problem is we don't know exactly where all these places are. What this is a chronicling of the conquests that had been going on for a while. And here, Israel's not looking to get into this, and here's why. Look, this is not where we want to be. This is not where we're stopping, but we've got to get to where we're going. So all that we ask is safe passage. We won't bother you. We'll be out of here before you know it. We won't take anything from you. They want to fight. Okay, well, they got one. Now Israel's occupying their land. Not even occupying it, they've conquered it. Okay. So, with all of that said, we get to verse 31. It says, And so thus Israel dwelt in the land of the Amorites. And then Moses sent a spy to Jazer, and they took its villages and drove out the Amorites who were there. Now, this is said, it's so cool, and I hope that we understand just how important it is that we catch this. when God speaks of things, and we see Jesus do this a lot, he would talk about events that had not yet happened, but he spoke of them with, there is no doubt that this will take place. He speaks of events future as though they've already happened, because he knows exactly what he's going to do. He has purposed in his own mind to do what he's going to do. Here's one of those occasions you'll see it like this. It's good to take notice of this, because the idea that we can really trust when God makes a promise and he tells us something, he intends to make good on the promise, because he's able. Look at how this is said just in these last few verses. Verse 33. So they turned and they went up by the way of Bashan. So Og, king of Bashan, went out against them, and he and all his people to battle at Edrei. So the Lord said to Moses, do not fear him, for I have delivered him into your hand. Has the battle yet taken place? No. Has Moses gone out? No. Has he already been delivered into Moses' hand? Yes. So can you imagine having that kind of confidence? We cannot be beat if we are doing as God is directing us. Now, we certainly know what happens once they step outside of that and they're not in God's will any longer. We see what happens to them. There's a good takeaway for all of us in this. We stay with those things that we know that God has promised. We make sure that we don't oppose him and that we have his will. Going back to what we looked at this morning, hugely important that we recognize we know what he wants us to do before we take a step. If we know that he is for us, that he's given direction, there is no way that it can fail. Where it fails is when we go out ahead of him and don't know for sure what he's asking us to do. Joshua will learn that the hard way. When we get to those places, they're going to see it. Now, verse 34, so the Lord said to Moses, do not fear him. I have delivered him into your hand with all of his people and his land. And you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon. Now they're taking land, they're taking cities, they're taking all the stuff that they said we don't want to touch it, but God brings them there, and until he can get them into the land, he's going to drive these people out, and you guys are going to have to sit here for a while until I can bring you into the land. Again, until the rest of you guys die off, basically. Verse 35, and so they defeated him, his sons, and all of his people until there were no survivors left to him, and they took possessions of the land. Wow. So this is now an interesting thing that will happen next. We don't have time to even crack the surface of this. So we're going to be ending quite a bit earlier than we usually do, about 10 minutes earlier. Because for a change, now we see Balak is saying, all right, those guys are on their way here, and everybody's getting wiped out. So I got to try something else. So that's where we have the whole Balaam story. How is it that you can get God to go after his people, if you want to put it that way? You're not going to defeat them in battle, so the only way that you're going to be able to defeat them is to get God mad at them. How do you get God mad at them? Get him to sin against him. That's the whole story of Balak and Balaam, and you'll find that even that is such a recognizable problem that it is mentioned in the book of Revelation when Jesus begins to address the 7 churches. That's still an issue. So, yeah, it's a big deal. So we'll get to that. We don't have time. There's just no way to touch it tonight. So what we'll do is pick up in 2 weeks, because next Sunday night is communion, and we'll pick up the whole Balaam and the whole donkey thing, and just so you can see how my mind works. I find that to be, again, one of those incredibly comical stories, right? So that's the whole angel and the sword and all that stuff, and the donkey runs off and it, hits his leg against a rock, and so Balaam gets mad and starts slapping the donkey around and asks why you're doing this, and the donkey answers him. Balaam doesn't get to the point of just, why are you talking to me? That doesn't seem to register with him. I find that to be funny in just this. You can become so enraged that things that shouldn't make sense, you just run right past them because you're so stuck in your rage. It's quite comical. It's to me, a really funny story with really sad consequence, because they find a way to get God once again stirred against the people because they are enticed to sin. So interesting stuff. Let's stand, and we'll end it a bit early. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you as we gather in this place tonight and as we get a chance to look at these couple of chapters, the importance of what we see there. How do we deal with the matter of when the people would go to war? And is that in any way contradictory? Or why the serpents on the pole? And what does that mean? And why is it important? These are things that you have been able to instruct us. As we take a look at the entirety of your word, all of it comes into perspective and focus, and we're grateful for that. We would ask, Lord, that you would be glorified in us. We thank you for this evening and pray that you would go before us. Keep us safe in our travels home, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.